Hey Acers. So, with all the furor, uproar, and hubbub and noise going around the internet right now about open game license issues from Wizards of the Coast, I decided I'm going to go ahead and throw my hat in the ring as well. So, I haven't actually ever read the whole original open gaming license that came back in 2000. So, um, just to kind of give you a Oh, and before I go into this, welcome to the Ace Role Playing Games channel. I'm your host, Mason Emerson. I am the founder and creator of the Ace Role Playing Game Club system, and I'm here to help you game for good and set up your own role playing game club wherever you're at. So, okay, little history lesson for you guys. And this is really bad timing on the part of Wizards of the Coast. So, and I'll get into all that. But the short history lesson is that in 1974, so 2 years before I was born, that also tells you how old I am, but that's okay. We get here. Anyway, so 2 years before I was born, 1974, Wizards of the Coast came out, or not Wizards of the Coast, but Tactical Studies Rules, which was a company founded by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, came out with a little thing called Dungeons and Dragons and launched our incredible hobby that we do now. And so next year is the 50th anniversary of that launch, of that game that came out and changed the group imaginations of everyone. Because it when you're reading a book, you can get into the head, you can get into the words, and the words can paint pictures in your head, and you can make something amazing. When you're watching a play, you're a further step back from the action, but you can see the people on the stage or in the round, and you're sitting in the audience, and you kind of actually participate a little bit of that. When you're watching a movie, on the other hand, or listening to an audiobook, you're not really interacting with that as much, and there's part of your mind that knows that you're still separate from it. But with a role-playing game, what Arneson and Gygax created was something that led to the ability for us to not only watch that movie in our mind, like when we read a story, but also be the source of the change in that story. So our game master, or us, we game masters, present an event or a happening, and then our players take that and run with it, and that's how the story's created. So it in 70s and into the 80s, you had Dungeons and Dragons rolling, and it would go overseas to Britain and have a separate publisher there. The publisher there actually was Games Workshop, which later started publishing its magazine White Dwarf, which is still one of the longest running pieces of original role playing game industry stuff. But they don't do role playing games anymore. Now they just do miniatures and do their Warhammer stuff. And hey, cool, rock on. Actually, I really like some of the lore of 40K. Warhammer 40,000 is it's one of the coolest lores that I've ever read. And actually, I used to play it back when I was in high school. I had an Eldar army specifically. I was buying the miniatures and painting the miniatures for the Harlequin army, and they were so cool. I think when I got rid of my army, I gave the whole thing, or sold the whole thing. I can't remember now. It's been too many years since I got out of Warhammer 40,000. Anyway, also I did end up playing the Legend of the Five Rings miniatures tabletop war game, and I just bought somebody else's Naga set because it was really cool, and it was like a couple $100. But the guy did an incredible job on those miniatures. It even had little tufts of grass on their bases of the miniatures and everything like that. But I'm getting distracted. Well, actually, to a degree, no, I'm not. And I'll tell you how and why in a second here. So it goes on. You get the satanic panic of the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, where you had mothers that were concerned about this Dungeons and Dragons games, and they got wild preachers behind them and just all sorts of things. And there were people who were actually convinced that there was Satanism in Dungeons and Dragons, and that you could use spells in the book to actually summon the devil and demons. And wow, 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 wow. That's all I have to say. Anyway, my friend Tracy Hickman, who wrote for TSR, Tactical Studies Rules, he wrote for TSR, and he created Ravenloft, and he also created a little thing that you guys might have heard of called Dragonlance. He and his friend Margaret Weiss. And shout out to both you, Tracy and Margaret. I love you guys. Um, anyway, they helped, Tracy helped end the Satanic Panic. So anyway, you get going into the 90s. Now, that's when I was starting into gaming, and that's when I was playing. But and I finally actually got to play some in the 90s, some second edition Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't get to play it in the 80s because of the Satanic Panic. My parents wouldn't even let me watch the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. I've said that in other videos though. Anyway, in the 90s, TSR was faltering and failing and getting ready to just crash and maybe even die. So in the early 90s, Wizards of the Coast comes along, and they start with Magic the Gathering, and then because their card gaming is so good, that's when they get in talks with Pokemon International, and they get the U.S. distribution rights for the Pokemon card game. They get to create the Pokemon card game. Now, about the same time, you got your Pokemon Game Boy games, and those are being produced by Hasbro over in Rhode Island. And excuse me, Hasbro decided along the way that they wanted to own all the Pokemon. So we'll get back to that in a second. Now, Wizards of the Coast sees TSR failing, and there's enough people there that play Dungeons and Dragons that they buy TSR. And they also bought, at the time, there was a Dune game that was in the works. They had actually already released prototypes of it or early releases of it, and I was getting so excited because Dune still is one of my favorite stories that's ever been done. And they're getting excited about releasing this Dune game, and then something happens there, and when Wizards of the Coast buys Last Unicorn Games as well, Dune just kind of goes away. And then, but they buy Dungeons and Dragons, and in 2000, they put out the Open Game License, OGL, and that's 1.0. Now, right about the same time they bought Last Unicorn Games is when Hasbro comes along with a lot of money and buys Wizards of the Coast. So now they own all of Pokemon, and oh yeah, they picked up this boondoggle of Dungeons and Dragons along the way. So we get, like I said, in 2000, you get the release of the Open Game License, and right around that same time is Dungeons and Dragons 3.0, which I liked 3.0. It was great. But then they realized they wanted to make some more real tweaks, so they made Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, which many aficionados of Dungeons and Dragons consider the high watermark of how good Dungeons and Dragons could get. Well, when Dungeons and Dragons went to version 4, 4 was a problem for a lot of players, and it really turned a lot of people off of TSR because not TSR, but Wizards now, because they really kind of tried to make it more like a video game or a video game interface. So trying to attract the video gamers. Well, there were enough people who didn't like it that this company that was making maps and stuff like that for Dungeons and Dragons called Paizo decided to use that open gaming license and create Pathfinder 1.0. Now, they went on to release Pathfinder 2.0, and they've released Starfinder, and actually, I guess it's the SRD that is the content that was basically, it kind of makes it so there's one game engine that people use, that D20 system, and they were able to make all sorts of games off it. There was a Star Wars game, there were even some Deadlands games and things like that. And then so Paizo has now become one of the biggest competitors to Wizards of the Coast. And this is where I want to teach you a little idea. And it's called an abundance mindset. And what that is this. There is there is plenty for everyone. If we have a scarcity mindset, we think there's not going to be enough, and we start making very poor decisions in our life. To a degree, Disney does this, where they bought up all the big companies. They bought Marvel, they bought Fox, and then they're now saying our version is the only version. I mean, Comcast and Cox Cable do it too. They basically they'll throttle other cable companies in their area and give poorer signals and stuff because you're not running it through them. And they charge you more and they give you worse customer service. And the thing is that businesses and companies have a way of making sure that the market stays fair. Because if you charge too much for your services and somebody comes along and offers a service that's at least as good, or maybe not quite as good, but it's of less cost, consumers are going to go over there. And then because consumers go over there, the other company's going to have enough money to now change and offer better services like what you were used to getting in the previous company. And that's the way the market works and grows. But when we take a scarcity mindset, thinking if somebody's competing with me, that means they're taking my thing away from me, and I can't have that. I have to destroy them. That is scarcity mindset. But there's the best quote to understand the abundance mindset is easily stated in this statement. And that is, the rising tide floats all boats. So, yes, there were people who maybe didn't play Dungeons and Dragons because they were playing Pathfinder. But somewhere along the way, people who are playing Pathfinder and people who are playing Dungeons and Dragons, they intermingle, they cross over, and one system might work better for somebody than the other. Now, if only there were a company that had a single system that you could put all sorts of skins over the top, and you could play the game with the same rules every time. Like Pinnacle. Not sponsored. And their product, Savage Worlds. And not only that, but they encourage fans and licensed creators to create their own Savage Worlds stuff and sell it. And there are royalties and things like that have to be paid, yeah. But they encourage the community to grow on its own. And I mean, I'm not going to get into the legalities or the I'm not getting into legalities. I'm not getting into any of that. I'm getting into the fact that Pinnacle has an abundance mindset. They have this idea that if somebody's dedicated enough, they can be a creator for Pinnacle products. And that is what this new open game license leak change thing that's coming out of Wizards of the Coast is like. I mean, the president of Wizards was talking to the president of Hasbro, who apparently used to be the president of Wizards. I'm don't quote me on that, but anyway, they were talking. She was talking to him, and basically pointed out that they were going to try with this new D&D 1 to basically force the fans, consumers, into buying post-purchase purchases. So basically, if you want that really cool rogue skin for your character in their D&D 1 online gaming platform, then you're going to have to pay another $10 for that. And they were going to nickel and dime us to death. We're going to have to just keep paying and paying and paying. We're going to have to buy subscriptions. Kind of like what they're doing with D&D Beyond. Incidentally, D&D Beyond was not created by Wizards. It was created by fandom. The same people who do Honest Trailers. It was created by them, and Wizards of the Coast bought it. And it's become now their official platform. And I've used D&D 1. I like D&D 1 well enough. I mean, it's a good enough product for what it is, especially for like quickly creating D&D characters and things like that. Hey, right on, rock on. Go on with your bad self. But trying to force D&D Beyond into D&D 1 and making this whole big thing where they were going to restrict virtual tabletop creators like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and Foundry and Astral. I don't know if Astral's still out there or not. But anyway, they were going to restrict the stuff in the way they could do things. I mean, I have a friend. He's got a thing called Adventure Roll that makes 3-dimensional dungeons, and it's got the D&D system programmed into it. So that also uses open game license. There's all sorts of things and all sorts of people out there, thousands of people whose living depends on that open gaming license, that permission to make a single, to have that D20 system and then make content based on that. And so in answer to that, Paizo, who waited a whole week, they waited a week for Wizards to make a comment about this open game license change that was pending. And Wizards never made a comment about it. And again, strike against Wizards here, because they didn't have their publicity and marketing and public relations department ready to go before anything about this open game license dropped. And it got leaked, I know that. But that's not the point. The point is, Wizards had turned on a scarcity mindset, and they decided they wanted to try and have all of it instead of continuing to share the market. Now, up to this point, Wizards has been the dominating force on the market. They're the million-pound elephant in the room, or whatever you want to call it. They have been such a great thing for role-playing games. And admittedly, yeah, I think the Dungeons & Dragons overall community ran very much a risk of becoming toxic towards anybody else who wasn't Dungeons & Dragons. And I still think that Dungeons & Dragons is a little too much of a stretch to learn all the rules and stuff. Whereas Savage Worlds, you can learn the basics of combat and how to narrate a story in a couple hours. And then everything else past there is just improvements to your game mastery. And so, with all of this going on, I think we are going to, just like, people talk about great moments in X history. Well, in role-playing game history, great moments are going to be when Gygax and Artisan produced the original Dungeons & Dragons. And it is going to be still considered a great moment to recognize in history when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR. But we're also going to have this big black eye that Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro is going to have. But anyway, going back to Paizo, they're releasing an open role-playing game license. And they're not going to own it. They're going to actually create a nonprofit corporation that will own this open RPG game license. And this open RPG game license is going to, it's being written by people who were associated with the original open game license from Wizards of the Coast. Lawyers and other people who were involved in that original idea of let's put this engine out there. And they're doing what Savage Worlds came along and has done better. But still, there's so much content out there that really it's stupid to just have Wizards come along and say, nope, we're going to void and nullify OGL 1.0 and 1.0A. We're going to void those, and you can only have 1.1 or what's now become 2.0. And people that I respect in the Dungeons and Dragons community, like really fun Jenny D, they have been encouraging their people to drop off of D&D Beyond. And so now Wizards is actually feeling the hit in their pocketbook at their bottom line. And that is where you have to pay attention to and show respect for your fans. I'll give you a literary example of this. There were these 3 movies that came out starting in the late 1970s through the early 1980s. You might have heard of them. They're called Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And they kind of changed movies in Hollywood in general. And they were created by George Lucas. But because of the editing on Star Wars, it was a different film than what he initially set out to do, and it was better. Because of the director, Irving Kershner, on Empire Strikes Back, and the writer, Larry Kasdan, you had one of the best movies ever made in Empire Strikes Back. It is one of the first times where a sequel was actually better than its predecessor. And it was good. It was really good. And then, with Return of the Jedi, it wasn't quite as good as Empire Strikes Back, but it was still good, and it wrapped the story up nicely. Now, fast forward to 1999. I'm sitting in the theater to go see Gladiator, and I hear John Williams' dulcet tones of, and yes, I could go off on the fact that Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and Superman are all the same song, just different movements. But that's neither here nor there. Williams has still written some of the greatest soundtracks in the world, and when it came to hearing the Star Wars music and knowing that it was Star Wars that it was talking about, I was totally cool. Anyway, so I hear those sounds coming through the speakers, and it says, every saga has a beginning. I was like, yes! The whole audience in that theater erupted in cheers, and we were so thrilled to know that Star Wars was coming back, and it was going to tell us the story of how Darth Vader became Darth Vader, and it was supposed to be it was going to be great. And then Lucas really messed it up. He really screwed up on that. He forgot the lessons he learned, especially in Empire Strikes Back. Because what he should have done, in my opinion, is he should have taken the concepts. He could come up with the concepts. He's a good concept man. I really appreciate his concepts, his ideas, his stories. He should have given those to Larry Kasdan and said, hey, I want to exclusively hire you for 3 films. We're going to do a prequel trilogy to Star Wars. And we would have probably gotten something with Obi-Wan Kenobi as the main character. And you guys have seen my videos about where I give you the sanitized version, the cleaner version of what if episode 1 was good, what if episode 2 were good, and what if episode 3 were good. But those are neither here nor there. I learned this lesson in the words from an acquaintance of mine, Terry Brooks. He wrote The Sword of Shannara and all the other Shannara books. Now, I met him in 1999, funny enough, after he had written the novelization for Star Wars Episode 1. So it kind of ties in here. But that novelization, or talking to Terry after his lecture, because I went and sit and listen to him lecture about the novel and everything like that. Talking to him afterwards, I asked him about it because he said he originally pronounced the name of the place Shannara, but I asked him about it. And he said the fans pronounced it Shannara. And I said, so which one is correct? And because this is really a key question: the creator or the fans, the audience, the people who actually support the creator. And he said Shannara is the correct pronunciation. Shannara is correct because the fans own the property, not me. And as long as I stay true to what the fans believe, know, and trust about the property, I will continue to sell books. And that's where George Lucas made his misstep. He didn't trust the fans. He didn't even go back and review his original material. So there's stuff in episodes 1, 2, and 3 that blatantly conflicts with stuff in episodes 4, 5, and 6. And I don't even acknowledge the sequels, that they even exist. As far as what I've seen so far, the only Star Wars post Jedi story-wise that was any good, or not story-wise, but post prequels, the only Star Wars movie that I've liked was Rogue One. And so I give it a half Star Wars film. So there are 3.5 Star Wars films. Now, I've heard very good things about Andor, and I have seen some of The Mandalorian. And Mandalorian was pretty well told. And the nice thing is it wasn't a Skywalker story. And that's, again, where Favreau and the other dude made some very wise decisions. and they dissociated that from the Skywalker saga until later on when Luke Skywalker comes in. But still, it was really well done. It was a space western basically. But Lucas did not stay true to what we as the fans believed and were hoping for. And now we look at Stephen King for a moment, whom, if you're under the age of whatever your parents would allow you to, don't read him. He's really got a lot of bad language in there for a child and for a teenager, and he's got a lot of bad scenes and kind of content in there too for under certain ages. I mean, I personally wouldn't allow it. I wouldn't want to read it if I were under the age of 18, because it's got a lot of grown-up topics in there. But on the flip side, Stephen King, you did a great job ending Duma Key. That's why it's actually my favorite book of yours. Anyway, the thing is that Stephen King wrote a series called The Dark Tower. And he had written the first 3 books, and then took a little while, and then he wrote the 4th book. And then he kind of got run over, and he had all sorts of things going on in his life. And then he finally came back to finish the series. It was almost a decade between books 4 and 5. It's to the point that the original reader of books 1, 2, and 3 for the audiobook had died. And so another reader had to pick up book 4. And then King, when he wrote that, somebody had already set up the darktower.net, and he'd gone through and he'd approved it, and there was a young lady who was running the darktower.net, and it was so well done and so well put together that when he went back to write book 5, 6, and 7 of the original series, he went back and listened to the audiobooks and re-immersed himself in his own world of the first 4 books. And then he went to the young lady at darktower.net and made sure that he was writing book 5 and launching into 6 and 7 to respect what the fans knew and loved about the original stories. I mean, I did read Dark Tower book 1, The Gunslinger, when I was like 13 or 14. My uncle handed it to me. Excellent book, but just wait a little bit to read it. But that comes back around full circle to Wizards. They did not pay attention to their fan base. They did not pay attention to the small creators and the YouTube creators and the movie creators and the video creators and the book creators and they didn't pay attention to those things. They just looked at their bottom line and said, how can we make more money? Okay, maybe that's not exactly what they did, but that's what their actions are saying that they did. And that's sufficient to say Wizards of the Coast does not actually care about you. They care about your money, and they want it in their coffers. And that's where the scarcity mindset is going to, in my opinion, kill Wizards. It's going to destroy a big toehold they have in the market, because right at the same time that they are killing everybody with their new OGL rules, there's SavageUniverse.com that goes into play. And it's coming soon. And I'll put their link in the thing here. But this is what it is about. Savage Universe is the place to find out about all of Pinnacle's partners, including aces, who are non-Pinnacle people who are allowed to publish official Pinnacle stuff. Savage Worlds Adventure Guild, which are creators who write their own Savage World stuff that it's not officially sanctioned by Savage Worlds, but it's good enough. And other creators like that. Translators and the translators, the media network, and even fans. So fan stuff can be found here too. We'll showcase our partners' excellent works, point you to actual plays, put all the various licensing information in one easy place to find, one easy to find place, and so much more. Check back soon for more. So, smaller companies like Pinnacle, and not Paizo, because they're actually they're pretty darn big. But Pinnacle and Paizo and I guess there's Green Ronin and things like that are out there have actually been given a huge gift by Wizards of the Coast. And that is where their big misstep is actually a boon for everybody else. Because those of us who are the fans, those of us who are the creators, those of us who are the people who just make videos like this, we are all being blessed with an opportunity to come out from under the shadow of the 20,000-ton gorilla. And we're now going to be able to begin to make strides and expand the market and make it so there's enough market share for everybody to go around. There's always more money. There's always more money. Remember that. So, anyway, I've gone on long enough. I need to make some reports and do some other stuff, but I love you guys. You're awesome. You're amazing. You are unique and special, just as you are. And you don't need to be what anybody else tells you you need to be other than you. So I'm telling you to be you. Be amazing. Game for good. I love you, and I will talk to you probably on Sunday when I make my next irregular Ace report. Until then, this is Mason Emerson from Ace Role Playing Games, telling you to game for good, and we'll catch you next time.